Well, I want to welcome everyone to this presentation today. I'm Kelly Yarbrough. I'm the lead administrator of the Tallgrass Artist Residency. I'm very happy to be joined by Leslie VonHolten, who is one of our current artists in residence in Matfield Green. Quick little intro for those of you who may be new to Tallgrass. This is a relatively small residency program, but we annually have 8 to 10 artists come to the very small community of Matfield Green, Kansas. There's a couple of Matfield residents here this morning with us. There's about 50 to 60 folks that live in this community, so it's quite small, but it's a really supportive community for the visitors and the artists that come spend time here. We invite these artists to spend 2 weeks in Matfield Green. They give a public presentation as part of their time there, but otherwise they are free to spend their time researching and making as they see fit. And then we invite everyone back to town in the fall to do a pop-up group exhibition and give artist talks. And I do want to say that that event will be happening this year on Saturday, October 1st. So if you are in Kansas or want to be in Kansas on October 1st, I very much encourage you to come to town. We will have events going on pretty much all day, starting with community open studios sponsored by Matfield Green Works, another organization in town. We will have artist talks throughout the afternoon at the School for Rural Culture and Creativity there in Matfield Green. And we'll also have dinner served in the gym of the old school building there, put on by local producers and gardeners. And it's a wonderful time. So I really encourage you to be there if you can. And I shared this the other day, but our big news for that event on the 1st is that artist Janine Antoni is actually going to be joining us as a guest speaker. She has been doing a lot of work with the KU Biological Research Station. And so kind of through that, we got connected, and she's going to pop over to Matfield Green to spend some time with us that day. So we're really, really excited about that. I think everyone is familiar with Zoom etiquette at this point, but I just encourage you to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. Feel free to utilize the chat. I'll be watching it and can respond. And then also we're going to hear from Leslie here a little bit first, but then we're going to open it up for some Q&A and conversation. So whether you use the chat or unmute later and want to ask a question, either is totally fine. We want to engage and hear from you. We are recording this session for our archive, basically, but that's what that will be used for. So with that, I want to introduce you all to Leslie VonHolten. I think many of you probably know Leslie or familiar with her wonderful work. I've had the pleasure of knowing Leslie for a few years now, so I was thrilled that she was able to join us for the residency program. But Leslie is a native Kansan, and she writes about the connections between land and culture. Her work includes environmental science, art history, community history, literature, and undertold stories. Her writing has been published in The Pitch, on Lawrence.com, Ceramics, Art and Perception. She has work coming up in the New Territory magazine and Literary Landscapes. She's also works in different media. She curates, she makes zines sometimes, which I think we're going to get to see a little bit of maybe in the fall. That would be exciting. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Leslie. Thanks for joining us today, Leslie.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. And I just want to echo what Kelly has said about Matfield Green being a supportive community. It has just been a real joy to be here. My thanks to Bill and Julia McBride for the space, Derek and Catherine, Teresa and Amy. I've just a lot of people have opened their doors and provided support. And I just think that's a really exciting way to live in a community of creators. So I appreciate that. So like what Kelly said, I am a Kansas-based writer. I have over the years left Kansas and then returned to Kansas, I think maybe 4 times over the course of my life, but have lived in Kansas permanently for the last 22 years. So my work for the last few years has focused on the prairie ecosystems. I try to connect the prairie, like Kelly said, to cultural history, personal experience and stories, undertold layers of what has happened on the land. And then sometimes I'll, work in some botany there to help connect us to the plants and the animal life that lives here. I love the grasslands. I love the prairie. That horizon line where the earth and sky is just part of my soul. I have had times where I lived in a major city and I would find myself, I would have to walk to the shoreline to just be able to look over the horizon of Lake Michigan, for instance. It was less about looking at the water than it was about just needing that horizon line that the prairie, that I missed from the prairie. So in 2020, the pandemic lockdowns really sparked a radical realignment in my life. I think a lot of us experienced this too. I assessed my value system. I reassessed my goals. I changed my job to a really wonderful job that I have now. I started therapy. To really work through some things. I intentionally worked toward bringing myself closer to people that I love. And then I also really changed my relationship to my writing during this time. I moved my focus from what used to be to the final written piece and started paying and giving much more attention to my process. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I'm going to share my slides. And so Kelly, give me a heads up if this fails. Okay, is that full screen? It is, okay, great. So this is a horse that lives across the street from where I'm staying this week and is just beautiful. So it's been fun to sit on the porch and just watch her in the field. And we've had a pretty bright moon this week and I mean, she just glows at night. So anyway. So another silver lining to the pandemic for me as I've realigned my writing practice is the online communities that have really opened up. And with that has been online writing workshops, ones that I have wanted to attend for years, but just couldn't because of family commitments, time and money. So for years, I really admired the work of the Dark Mountain Project out of England. They are some radical thinkers who work together to change the stories and the art about the earth. They actually have a manifesto. Their manifesto is that we need to uncivilize our writing practices as a way to change the way that we all treat the planet. So this year, I've been really fortunate to get into a small cohort to be working with them in their workshops. And Charlotte Duquesne is a writer and performer in England who has been co-leading the workshops. And one day this spring, she was talking and she reminded us, and I loved this quote, and it's just been such a guiding term for me since she said it, "Our practice is our praise song." I just love that. I want my practice to be a praise song to the prairie and to the planet. So today what I'm going to do with us all gathered here is to share my practice. And because it's process, my talk will probably be pretty messy. And those of you who know me know that I'm kind of messy and pretty casual anyway. So just buckle in, bear with me for the ride. So some examples of my practice. See if I can go forward. There we go. So I write about the prairie because I love to be on the prairie. So it's sort of, I don't know, it's a chicken and the egg thing. I don't know if my writing draws me to the prairie or the prairie draws me to my writing practice. But being outside is vital. Sometimes, usually, often it is just a simple hike that I can fit into the busyness of my day. But then there are other times where I go and spend some intentional time on the prairie with these practices. So you'll see here, like, here's me sitting in a bison wallow. And here's another photo of me just kind of lying on the grass, looking at the clouds, trying to feel sort of the vibrations of the earth that are happening underneath me, and thinking about, you know, the animals and the people who have been on this spot, you know, years and centuries before I did. It can be buggy, it's certainly dirty, but it's a lot of fun too. So I also spend a lot of time and energy to see the prairie in all seasons and times. So a while back, I was going through a period of doing full moon hikes without any lights, without a headlamp or a you know, flashlight or anything like that, just as a way to see the land in different shadows, different shapes and colors. Those of us who have done night walks know that the sounds change when we're out at night. It's just a completely different world. So as I was hiking one summer night under the full moon, I could see the shadow of a stick across my path. It initially, I thought it was a stick, but then I remembered, well, number one, when I hiked out, that stick was not there. Number two, this is the prairie. Where on earth would a branch come from? There are no trees near us. So that's when I realized, okay, I'm encountering a snake here. Let's see if I can show you. There she is. So not only was she a snake, she was a rattlesnake, and I had to really alter this image to bring her out. So I was not nearly this close. I was trying not to torment her. So I really zoomed in, and also it was a lot darker than this photo makes it look, but what a beauty. I mean, just the patterning on her is just so breathtaking. And so this encounter with this snake inspired this piece. So this will be the first of a few readings of my writing that I'll share today. I saw her lying across the gravel path, her full length outstretched from one edge to the other. She didn't move as I got closer. We were both slow in this August heat dome. I continued my tired gait, assuming she would just move on across the path, back into the grass, both of us in our respective ways. I wondered what kind of snake she was, but she was just shadow. I was tired and hot and ready to be done with the day. Instead, instantly, she coiled and I heard exactly who she was. Massasauga, a prairie rattlesnake. Massasaugas are small as far as rattlesnakes go, petite cousins compared with timber rattlers, diamondbacks, and other vipers of the American West. Their tails buzz more than they rattle, and they probably can't kill you, but they will make your experience with them miserable if you push it. This Massasauga, she told me she was ready to take me there. And what was my instinct? As I stood there, me and snake and moon and no breeze, snake and moon and heavy humidity, I wanted to hold her, to possess her, to make her part of me, part of my body. So you can see this is sort of where my process really kind of gets rollicking. I go into some uncomfortable reactions to wildlife like that. I, of course, would never pick up a rattlesnake or frankly any wild animal who didn't need some help perhaps, but that initial feeling of just like, oh my, you know, why did I love this snake so much and why did I want to hold her? It was a feeling I didn't expect, and one I wanted to explore a little bit more. So yeah, so I'll start writing these things, it'll start sparking ideas. And then another part of my practice, which is just a couple of guiding lights that sort of inform my life altogether, and certainly my practice, is poetry, which I've read since high school almost daily, and art history, which is a great passion of mine. So I also then look toward poets and writers and artists to see sort of how they engage with the land. Someone who's really been resonating with me lately is the artist Ana Mendieta. She was just a master of the body and land connections. She was very active in the 70s and 80s. I believe she passed away in 1985. And she really worked in directly connecting to the land and to the wild and the wilderness of women's bodies. I also was thinking, when I was pondering snakes, about a time when I was younger, in my late teens, early 20s. After a great heartbreak or a great disappointment, I would do what I would call shedding my skin. And my old roommate's on this call, so I think she can remember some of these moments too, where I would just like clean out my closets. I would donate clothes that no longer suited the new person that I felt myself becoming. I would trash mementos from failed relationships. You know, it was just a psychological cleaning of house that was also materialistic, and just like off with the old, in with the new. So thinking about that term that I had used, shedding my skin, and thinking about Ana Mendieta and all of these encounters with rattlesnakes, I wanted to go deeper. And so this next reading is part of a 3-part prose poem where I'm putting my body into the prairie landscape a little more directly. And I will read this. This is just the first of 3. And this is Self as a Prairie Snake. Eyes clouded, breath held, turn of body against the rock. Off go the old eyelids, off the full length of me. The outer layer, the ticket stubs and pressed flour and the notebooks from last semester. Off goes my face, the coaster from that club, the place with the head swelling din. I'm in control again. My heart is rapid beating life within a scared soul. I need the heat of the world to sustain me, moving to rock, to land path, to tree branches above, moving and surprising and adaptable. I never have given credit to myself for that. It was a liberation each time, shedding skin, losing an assumed self, a future outgrown. So another element that I throw into sort of the pot of what my practice is also considering time, and what I call geologic time, although I maybe don't always go that deep with it, but just, remembering that what we are experiencing here, and even what we know and have been told about the experiences before us, there are millennia of Earth happenings that go so far back that those are stories that we're still trying to figure out as respectfully as we can. So my next rattlesnake encounter was a few months later, after that full moon hike. I was at Big Basin Nature Preserve in Clark County, which is here in Kansas, down by the Oklahoma border. It's just east of the 100th meridian. So it's a mixed grass prairie, and like the tall grass prairie here in the Flint Hills, there's a little more sagebrush, some more cacti. It's definitely sort of that line of aridity before you get out of the Great Plains and into the desert landscape. I travel there regularly because it's beautiful. It's just a breathtaking space, but also I'm fixated on the work of Ronald Johnson, who was an avant-garde poet who grew up in Ashland. And trying to figure out his very strange and sort of transcendental poetry is sort of a fun exercise with me that also drives me nuts. But so Big Basin Nature Preserve is two massive prehistoric sinkholes. The largest one is about 1 mile in diameter, and it is home to a bison herd and also antelope and many other animals. I'm sure a lot of turtles I've seen there. Within Little Basin is another sinkhole called St. Jacob's Well, which goes 56 feet deep and is probably spring fed. It has always had water in it. And the reason I keep going back to this space is I'm trying to figure out Ronald Johnson's poem called Arc 47, Plow Spire. And in his building of, he was considered a word architect. And so he built spires of words that go over these spaces, and St. Jacob's Well is one of them. And like I said, he was avant-garde. So last November, I was out there for a hike, and when I stopped, two creatures pretty much cut my hike off within feet of where I stopped. I almost stepped on a rattlesnake. And she, unlike the rattlesnake that I had encountered under the full moon, she went off into the sagebrush, so I couldn't see her, but I could hear her. She kept those rattles going the whole time. And so I thought, okay, my path is clear. I'm going to be able to go down there. And then I saw this beautiful boy sitting right next to the well. And so I knew that my hike there was not going to be a hike. So I was able to stand on the edge of the cliff, listen to the rattlesnakes, watch this bison bull down below me. And I've wrote about all of this, and this article will be published by the New Territory, I'm thrilled to say, later this winter. But Johnson's concert is a dissonant meditation. I can't be told about the prairie and St. Jacob's Well. I need to feel it, to be in it. The poem that I might write from that experience is nothing but an end product of the transcendent act of writing, of holding space on that storied spot. So I read Plow Spire not as a celebration of land, but as a reminder of practice. Put your body on that dirt, in that wind, and touch that water. Sense the weight of history and the weight of memory, and then breathe in the simple stillness of a land that is connected to you, but moves on. Geologic time, bison time, snake time, time in circular seasons forever. Today I am here. 70 years ago, a future poet was here. And 60 years before that, the Northern Cheyenne camped here, returning to their land. St. Jacob's Well remains. This poem has taught me that connection is in building stories together in community across centuries. Margie Stein worked to protect this land, and then Johnson anointed it. Bison and snake hold it. I return to it. There is a smallness in this vast landscape that gives an unexpected comfort, knowing that and hoping that my spirit could return 500 years from now and see this water again. So that consideration of geologic time really speaks to me. And, as part of the major problems of our world today is the way sort of that our minds have been conditioned in this settler mindset of conquering the land, not thinking about what the land will be if you could visit 500 years from now. I think a lot of writers are working these days. I like to think myself included, where we're trying to blur those lines between the human experience and the more than human world. We are all part of this natural world. So in these imaginings, I consider myself or my body in larger time, experiencing these ecosystems in a different way than I have explored before. Like I mentioned earlier, so it was just a thrill for me to be awarded a tallgrass residency, and I knew right away that I wanted to bring this work about snakes to a story of someone who, when she could not shed her skin, she changed it. And I will warn you, this is stuff that I'm working on this week, and so we're really going to get messy here. You all, even if you don't know who this is, you've seen this photo before. This is Maud Stevens Wagner, and you know this photo because it's an iconic photo, American photo, that is housed at the Library of Congress. But she grew up here nearby in Emporia and then the Homestead section of Chase County, and she is buried just 7 miles from where I'm sitting here in the Flint Hills today. I want to give a shout out to Lisa Stoller at the Lyon County History Center, who was very generous with her time and knowledge and her research of Maud. I got to spend the afternoon with Lisa yesterday, really geeking out about census records and Sanborn plots, trying to figure out where Maud grew up. And so please support your local history centers. They are vital to these stories that people will look to uncover for centuries to come. So let me see what my next slide is. So Maud Stevens Wagner left the Tallgrass Prairie to fly through the air. She was a circus entertainer and worked as an aerialist and a contortionist. And then in 1904, she met Gus Wagner, who is illustrated here. He's a very illustrated man. And he wanted to take her out on a date, the story goes, and she wouldn't go on a date until he taught her how to tattoo. They would eventually intertwine their bodies together for the next 37 years. So I visited their graves so far twice this week. It's part of the walking on the land of my practice. I visited with my husband when I first arrived this past weekend, and then I went again in the morning light to walk the paths. So some of this approach of walking the land and doing these imaginings of these historical characters, people from history, is part of a psychogeography approach to a writing practice. You can't even call it research, it's just sort of imagining, what was the life of Maud Wagner up here on this hill and in this landscape. So here's a part of a work in progress. Maud and Gus covered their bodies with art, working the fringes of polite society with their already outdated hokey pokey tattooing technique. The kids today call it stick and poke. We used to call it jailhouse tattoos. Their barely clothed bodies roiled through the circuses and sideshows of America, snaking along the dusty roads from town to town. At some point, Maud had a snake tattooed on her chest, cartoonishly angry, climbing a palm tree in an exotic scene of tame lions, a woman, and a monkey. Eventually, Maud returned to the prairie, tattoos and a husband and their daughter in tow. Her illustrated body covered in stories of ancient temptation and feminist freedom. Gus took up taxidermy and snake handling in this open land. He died in 1941 after being struck by lightning, and thus ended their coiled lives together. They are buried in Homestead Cemetery on a windswept hill. Prairie to circus to prairie. Body, space, same space, different body. So of course, as I've mentioned in my meditations at St. Jacob's Well has taught me, so think more expansively about the long arc of time, geologic time, and recognize that there are millennia of firsts before us. This is Kakitsi. Like Maud, her image is probably familiar to you too. That's because this portrait of her is at the Smithsonian. Her portrait was painted by George Catlin in 1834, probably at Fort Gibson in present-day Oklahoma. The article about her portrait says that she was Kiowa or Wichita. I think a lot of people will agree that she is probably a Wichita, from the Wichita Nation. But she had been living with the Osage, and then she was at Fort Gibson where George Catlin painted her. So you see here across her collarbone and down her arm and also around her lips and chin there that she's quite tattooed herself. Which is not to say that Maud was not a badass and that Maud was not a first in her world of tattooing, but also we see this opens up our minds to thinking. I don't know if a woman tattooed Kakitsi or if it was a man. I'm still looking into this, but we do know that the Wichita women were very tattooed. And if that tradition lives on, I've reached out to the Wichita Nation in Oklahoma to learn more. But again, you know, I, in my mind, can connect Kakitsi to Maud, to Ana Mendieta, what she's doing, to the snake, and snakes leaving their skin behind, and how, you know, skin is performed on the prairie. These are the things, this is the messy stuff that I'm trying to connect all. So here's my final reading, and then we can open up to conversation and yeah. So up on Open Range Road, I found her emptied, an intact skin, abandoned. Like all snakes, Massasaugas shed their skin when they outgrow it. The skin doesn't grow with them. The process is common. It's a surprise to me that the land isn't littered with glowing snake skin caught in trees like plastic shopping bags, snake skins gathering at our tires on windy days against our houses. What if we all left a body story behind? If we lived low to the ground, heart to the soil, in a place where we did not know where body ended and earth began, would my desire beat within the land? Would you know my story in some vague and quiet way before you knew me? And with that, I thank you very much for joining us. And let me stop sharing my screen. All right.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That was a wonderful presentation. And thank you for sharing like some work that's in progress too. I know that's always like a vulnerable thing. And, you know, we ask all of our residents to share during their time. So it's always a huge gift when people share things that are in process. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Well, we can open it up to questions from the audience, questions or comments. To get things started off, I might just ask you one question, but then I want to open it up and anyone can either put a question in the chat or unmute or raise your hand. We'll go from there. I wanted to just ask you, Leslie, as someone who grew up in Kansas and still lived here, have you always been interested in this place? Have you always felt a connection to this place, or has your relationship with Kansas kind of changed and evolved over time?
I would say I think I was very connected to it in my youth. You know, my brother and I spent weekends and afternoons down at the creek, you know, catching crawdads, and we lived outside a lot. My parents had a massive garden. But then when I was 10, my father joined the Army, and that's when we started moving around a lot. And when we were moving, looking back now, I recognize that I wouldn't let myself be connected to a place because I knew we'd be leaving again. And I had developed this callous over my heart about being connected. And I am so delighted that Wyatt Townley is here, because I don't know if I've ever had this conversation with her, but I was working for Humanities Kansas when Wyatt was the poet laureate, and she did a series of poetry projects with Kansans about home and defining home and making Kansas home. And it was, I mean, it was a life-changing experience with me to see those poems come in and to see how people defined it. So I loved being outside, I loved to be outdoors, but through that poetry, I was able to connect in a much deeper level with Kansas at that point.
Thank you. All right. Everyone else. So feel free to unmute and ask a question or raise your hand and I'll call on you, or use the chat.
There's some things in the chat now. Are there any questions in there?
Looks like mostly praise.
I love you guys. Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you. No questions. I put it all on the table.
Oh, I see Diana Stareznik Dean has raised her hand.
Hey, Diana.
Hey, you know that you are, you and I have a shared soul here in our connection with the Prairie, because, you know, I hike out there all the time. One of my questions and concerns is that so much of Kansas is in private hands. And like, I grew up in Kansas City. And when I grew up in Kansas City, Western Kansas started at Lawrence, right? And so I didn't even have that experience. I didn't even experience the Prairie until I moved back from California after going to college. And that was when I realized that that was where my soul felt really whole. My question though is how to have that experience for other people in an accessible way. When so much of the population is in the eastern part of the state, how do we get them out? And how do we help them find places where they can experience it? Because it's not an easy thing if you don't already live in a rural area.
That's a great question, Diana. Yeah, I'm so thankful for the people who worked to preserve the Tallgrass Prairie Nature Preserve. Although I know it was a very contentious and heated debate back in the day, and I think there's some of that still lingers, and you know, I respect that. But I think that has done so much for prairie preservation, because there's no beating getting people out there on the land in any way they can. And they do such a wonderful job there of making it accessible to folks of all kinds of, you know, abilities, which I also appreciate. Yeah, it's, you know, it's getting people out to Western Kansas and to the Western vistas. It's so much about driving, and it is hard to find those places where you can get out of the car and just walk. I don't know if I have an answer to this, Diana, so much as I probably sending up a praise song to the people who are doing the work, who've done the Flint Hills bike path. And there's the path that goes from Ottawa to Humboldt, which is also another great way to experience it. I think it's at the Prairie Spirit Trail. And then Kelly and I were just talking about before my presentation about, you know, there are some people doing hip camp spots in their pastures and on their farms. And so even though it's private property, it's accessible through that website. I think Airbnb has, all as complicated as it is, and I recognize that, but it has also helped open up some spaces where people traditionally wouldn't have thought to take a vacation. They just want to get away and get out into space and grass. And so that provides an opportunity too. So, and then we also do have a new state park, Little Jerusalem's Badlands, way out on the western edge of the state. And I highly recommend people go there. And they do guided flower walks once a month maybe, and a lot of, you know, the rangers are really passionate about that park. So yeah, it's out there, but this isn't England where we can just walk across any pasture we want. Sadly, we do have to respect the fence lines.
Thank you. I might just add on to that and give a shout out to like the Nature Conservancy in Kansas is pretty
Absolutely
active. And there's some really interesting public-private partnerships in this state that do make some land accessible. So even though Nature Conservancy land, for example, is privately owned, many of their sites are accessible to the public. I'll also say like the agritourism program in Kansas is an interesting one too. So private residents like Bill McBride can open up pieces of their land for access on trails or other land spaces. So there are more things than might first meet the eye, but it does take some research to find those spots sometimes.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, Kansas Land Trust, I think 4 of their properties are also publicly accessible. Diana, if you want a new project, we could build a website to make it easier for people to find these things.
I saw there's a couple questions in the chat. I saw one first from Courtney Masterson. Tell us more about your plans for the residency. I missed it.
So I'm trying to work as much as I can, but also doing a lot of exploring and working with the community. Matfield Green Days is this Saturday, and Bill has already pulled me in on, I think I'm working a scavenger hunt that day. So anyway, so that's some of the plan, doing some hiking, a little bit more hiking. And then I'm also, if you come to the October 1st event, I'm working on little zines about that will hold my finished snake piece. And these will be free to folks who want to come here. And if you can't come here, send me a DM and I'll probably be able to get one in your hands at that point. So still thinking more about mod and about snakes. That's what I'm doing.
Cool, thanks. Francesca has a question. Would you like to meet?
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Leslie, for sharing such amazing work, and thank you, the residency, also and Ahimsa for inviting me to be part of it as a guest. It has been really wonderful. And I think my question for Leslie, maybe just picking up from what you just mentioned, in terms of this idea of things or sort of like what we do as artists in the everyday, going beyond research, instead of like, I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit more about how do you arrive at sort of like that idea where we don't have to use maybe the academia or like this very kind of like official or formal ways in which we go about, kind of like, or, who we are and how do we become. So I wonder, how's that process for you?
I think that's a great question, Francesca. Thank you. So I definitely rely on scholarship, and I do try to, the information that I put into my creative nonfiction, I definitely try to vet through the research. But also, I'm not a researcher. I don't have that time or honestly that skill set to go deep like an academic would, like a historian. But what I like to do is work with the work that is there, that's been peer reviewed and vetted, and then put a creative voice to it as a way to maybe open it up. I think we all know that, there are certain people who read history books, and then there are other people who read fiction or creative writing. And to try to bring those two things together to tell these stories in a more storytelling kind of way is very fun and for me, and just the playfulness of the language that creative nonfiction allows me that academic writers can't stretch into as much. I think that's the area that I really like to work in. I love poetry. I love wordplay. Sort of what Ahimsa was doing on Tuesday with, just the way that he was flowing and sparking from one word to another is really exciting and energizing for me. I'm having a hard time seeing hands.
I'm trying to see if there's any other questions in the chat, but I think it's mostly comments about trails and accessible land.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so Carol Hale mentions Lake Wilson bike paths, and she's right. That's a great place to experience Western Kansas, the ecosystems there.
Wyatt, were you raising your hand? Yes, okay, so go ahead.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And Leslie, you made a comment apparently about something about me, and I was just out with the gutter guys. I missed it, but I just wanted to say I was really inspired by your talk, and I loved that you know, that you're focusing on process over product, and how the mess of it, the bloody, the muddy, and the beautiful surgical process of bringing the inside out, and the invisible visibly onto the page. I always relate to page. Do you write on page? Yes, of course you do.
I do.
Yeah, you start there.
My journal. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love that, and I love the palpable, visceral experiences that you illustrated, lying on the earth. I mean, as a yoga teacher, that's just it's so beautiful, and feeling the energy there, and also your being with the rattlesnake. That's quite something. It reminded me of when I woke up and there was a what was it? Copperhead. There was a copperhead under our bed. So that was it. But anyway.
One of the better experiences.
So, and I also just wanted to say how inspiring I found your full moon walks with no headlamp. That's, wow, I want to go with you.
Yes.
I want to go with you sometime and do that. But
yeah, if it's a clear sky, the moon is all you need when you're out on the prairie. Yeah.
I love that as a tradition, the full moon walk.
Yeah. Well,
And
thank
so
you.
Thank you so much for that.
Well, Wyatt, I appreciate your kind words. And when you were talking to the gutter guys, I was explaining how your home project, when you were poet laureate, was life altering for me and really helped open me up to connecting to Kansas as home. So appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I think it's a lifelong project, isn't it? Finding home.
It is.
Leaving home and then returning home. It's
a practice as well.
Thank you.
I see Diana. Oh, I think Diana and Courtney are talking. So Courtney asks, what's my favorite prairie wildflower? You know, right now I am obsessed with rattlesnake master, and not because of this rattlesnake thing that's going on, I think, but it's just such a funky flower, and I wish I had an example here. And then the stiff sunflowers are just bonkers here in the Flint Hills right now. So they're really speaking to me now. They're everywhere, and the goldenrod too. Yeah, Courtney. So Courtney's a botanist and an educator. She says she loves rattlesnake master too. So yeah, awesome. The trains are a thing here as well. I don't know if you could hear that, but yeah, the trains have been great. All right.
Any other questions or comments? Well, this has been a great group. Thank you all so much for coming out. Yeah.
Well, Kelly, I appreciate you and organizing, being the leader of all of this, and Derek and Catherine and Bill and Julia. Thank you. This has just been such a tremendous opportunity. And all of you who have joined me here today, thank you so much. Practice is so important to creative work and to writing. And I would say the second most I'm not going to say second, I would say as important is community. And if you are a writer or an artist, have a community, build a community, and take care of your community. I can't stress that enough. It's just everything to me. So thank you all for being here and supporting me.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks so much for joining us. If anyone is around Matfield Green this weekend, this Saturday is Matfield Green Days, full of free public events that are great for all ages. So come visit if you're able to. And then Saturday, October 1st is our other big day of events for Tallgrass residents as well. So hope to see some of you again in the future.
Yes, thank you.
Great rest of your day.